Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 10th anniversary of the Symposium on the History of Attorneys of Color. My name is Judge Robin Stewart Johnson. I'm the chairperson of the committee. At this time, we're going to open with some remarks from Quinnipiac Law School, our hosts. On behalf of Quinnipiac Law School, we have Professor Marilyn Ford.
Good morning and welcome. I stand before you to give you the official welcome to Quinnipiac Law School. And as part of my welcome, I'm going to speak really briefly about the 2017 movie Marshall. How many of you all saw that movie? Great, terrific. Then you know that attorney Michael Koskoff wrote the screenplay for the film, which is a biographical legal drama with a bigoted state's attorney, a bigoted judge, and a bigoted bar association. Some of y'all who know me say they shouldn't have invited her to do the welcome, okay? Now, in the movie, Thurgood Marshall comes to Connecticut to represent a black man accused of raping a white woman. Judge Carl falsely admits Marshall to his court, but forbids him to speak in the courtroom during the trial. How many of y'all remember that? Perfect. As a result, Marshall has to communicate through a white insurance lawyer who has never tried a case in Connecticut. So why am I referencing that movie in the celebration of the history of attorneys of color? Because that movie represents the treatment of lawyers of color in Connecticut, the attitude of many white judges, lawyers, and others in the legal profession in the 1940s, and even as late as the 1970s when I arrived in Connecticut. Young black lawyers were knowledgeable about this attitude and treatment of black attorneys, and as a result, we chose to work elsewhere. Avoided Connecticut. Rather, we chose to work in New York, Boston, and New Jersey, and other places where we felt welcome. But thanks to organizational efforts of attorneys of color, including, and I hate to mention a few and leave out others, but I'm going to start with John Rose, Joe Moniz, Sandy Cloud, Elaine Drummond, Lou Robinson, Judge Barlow Boyce, yours truly, and some others, the George Crawford Black Bar Association was formed. And later, our sponsors, including the Lawyers Collaborative for Diversity, the Asian Pacific American Bar Association, the Asian Bar Association Connecticut, the Hispanic Bar Association, and other affinity groups were also formed. These affinity groups are sponsors of this program today, and they have been instrumental in attracting and retaining lawyers of color in the state of Connecticut. So today, we're here to celebrate the progress lawyers of color have made in Connecticut since Thurgood Marshall was forbidden to speak in court here. We're here especially to celebrate the extraordinary progress made over the last decade for lawyers of color who have become judges, managing partners and partners in law firms, prosecutors, public defenders, private practitioners, president and officers of the Connecticut Bar Association, and yes, even Attorney General and United States Attorney for Connecticut. So I'm here to welcome you. Hope you enjoy the panel and the presentations that are going to be made by the panelists who represent some of the best and brightest of the lawyers of Connecticut, lawyers of color who are now welcome in the state, who can now speak in the state, and who are now thriving in the state. I hope you feel welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Ford, for some of the reminders. Good morning and welcome to the Quinnipiac University School of Law for the 10th anniversary of the History of Attorneys of Color Symposium, a celebration of progress and perseverance. On behalf of the Connecticut Bar Foundation, our thanks to Dean Jennifer Brown and Quinnipiac University School of Law for hosting and extending a warm welcome to us. Our thanks also to Superior Court Judge Robin Stewart Johnson, who is the chair of the Symposium Committee, and the other committee members who worked tirelessly to develop today's symposium. The committee members are listed in the program. We have come a long way since our 2012 symposium. There are now more attorneys of color practicing law, and many of them have moved into prominent positions of the legal profession, as stated by Professor Ford. They're in private practice, they're in government, in the judiciary, including Justice Richard Robinson, the first Black Chief Justice of the Connecticut Supreme Court, and Judge Melanie Cradle, the first Black female judge on the Connecticut Appellate Court. Today, we will hear from some of those attorneys and judges about their career paths and how their jobs have been impacted by the pandemic. So thank you for attending, both in person and on Zoom. We are looking forward to a very interesting and informative discussion. Now, you will hear from Judge Robin Stewart Johnson, Symposium Committee Chair.
Good morning again. It was 10 years ago that I sat exactly where you are sitting, and it is my joy to be the chairperson of this committee. At that time, I sat in the audience and thought, what an amazing opportunity that we have. Over the last 10 years, we have had such progress. Many of those progressive people are sitting in this room today. I do not want to exclude anyone, but I definitely want to acknowledge two individuals. Dean Ebony Nelson is here with us today at the UConn Law School. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your leadership. And our newest addition to the historical timeline, our Chief Public Defender from African American descent, Tashawn Bowden Lewis. I want to remind everyone that the historical timeline is a work in progress, that you all have an opportunity to add to that list. We have available today an opportunity for you to fill out a card and tell us what we're missing. You're all living history, and without your help, we would overlook some individuals. This project is about acknowledging those people who have paved the way for all of us. And we do not want to overlook anyone who has done so. So make sure you look at the timeline, and if we overlooked something or if you think of something, fill out a card and we will research it and add to it. I want to thank the committee for all their hard work. We began meeting before the pandemic shutdown, and it was ironic that we had our last meeting approximately March 8th of 2020, and that was in person. We had the opportunity to meet with many people using conference calling, and boy, has the world changed. So in the year that we didn't meet, many people did research, started looking into the historical timeline, updating it, and then we began meeting over the last 2 years virtually. At the beginning of this year, we discovered that this was a 10th anniversary and that many, many milestones had taken place. So in acknowledgement of the milestones and also to regenerate our interest in this particular topic, we called this symposium. And thank you again for attending. Thanks to the panelists who will participate in person and virtually today. And thanks to the committee. I want to acknowledge the staff of the Connecticut Bar Foundation. We have new staff members who have jumped right into the middle of everything. And I want to specifically thank Stacy Meyer here, our tech guru. She just jumped into the middle of this approximately 6 months ago. And someone who thought they were leaving the Connecticut Bar Foundation but gave me her personal phone number and has joined our committee as a committee member is our Liz Drummond, our institutional memory. And thank you, Liz, for continuing as a volunteer. And Liz has had the benefit of many, many phone calls and many discussions. She can't get far enough away, and she has been wonderful, so we have that continuity of institutional memory. I'm going to introduce the next speaker. Our keynote speaker is herself a historian. Natalie Broswell began her career in private practice. She worked in private practice at Updike, Kelly, and Spellacy, but has made most of her career protecting our public interests. She's been a public servant in the comptroller's office for many, many years, and she is our first African-American comptroller in the state of Connecticut. Natalie also spent many times working with programs dealing with efficiency in the environment and energy. She was in the state comptroller's office regarding retirement securities for over 10 years. She is acknowledged as a leader in the country, is very active in the George Crawford Black Bar Association, the Connecticut Bar Association, the Lawyers Concerned for Diversity, and on a national level, the National Association of Bond Lawyers and the National Association of Public Pension Attorneys. She also does a little work with the Urban League here in Connecticut when she has some free time. I am sure you're going to be energized by her comments and her statements, and thank you, Attorney Braswell, for being here. Huh? We are? Sorry. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I see so many familiar faces in the room. Want to say hi to John Rose. Without him, and I think he knows this, I wouldn't be standing up here today where I am. Or Moy Ogilvy, or Dawn Westbrook. I see Tamar being like, and me. There are so many accomplished Black attorneys in this room today. It's just overwhelming, really, to see what we have accomplished. So I was invited here today to give this keynote address back in April. I was told that the theme was a celebration of progress and perseverance. My mind immediately filled with the names of all the colleagues that I see here today who have excelled as lawyers and jurists, making the legal field a whole lot more diverse and inclusive. You've all seized the opportunity presented to you, opportunities that would have been unthinkable, as Ms. Ford said, in the not so distant past. It's impossible to ignore the progress that we've made. I feel it every day as the first Black person to hold the position of state comptroller. It might surprise you to hear this, but I didn't grow up saying, hey, I'm gonna be the state comptroller. I also didn't know that I wanted to be a lawyer. When asked what path I took to get here, where I am right now in my career, as an attorney and now a constitutional officer, I always answered, as many of you I'm sure would, that my family led the way. My accomplishments are the realized dreams of my immigrant parents, born of the expectations of my grandparents, and the sacrifices of generations that came before me. I'm a first-generation college student and a first-generation law school graduate. Put simply, as many of you in this room, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. I'm also keenly aware that many others that look like me and look like my family would be thriving in the legal world, in government, and in every other field if they had been given the opportunity to do so. The legal profession is historically, unfortunately, lacking in diversity, which is tragic because the law itself has the ability to be a great equalizer in society. The concept of a jury of our peers is radically inclusive, despite what our friends and neighbors might say about getting called up for jury duty. While the writing of the law can be biased and the enforcement of the law can sometimes be selective, cruel, and oftentimes deadly, that argues for strengthening the collective commitment to relentlessly improve upon the law. We have to expand opportunities for young people, make the legal profession of all levels more diverse and inclusive, and empower our educational institutions to prepare the next generation of great legal minds. And we need to do it quickly. As I mentioned, I was asked to give this address in April, a celebration of progress and perseverance. But in the time since that invitation arrived on my desk, our nation has dealt with several reminders that progress is not a straight line. And nothing we've accomplished, no victory that we've won, is ever truly guaranteed. We've seen a racist shooting in a grocery store and a massacre at an elementary school. Two loud crashing waves resonating in an ocean of everyday American violence. The institutional response to a grieving nation was basically met with a shrug. And last week, for the first time in my life, we watched one of our most important institutions take rights away from Americans when the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood. Today is supposed to be a celebration, again, of progress and perseverance, but I'm honestly not feeling very celebratory, and it's harder today to feel good about our progress, so let's talk about perseverance. We're living through a seismic shift in the American experiment, one where the timely consolidation of power can bulldoze popular sentiment, the common good, and decades of legal precedent. For those paying attention to the political gains of the far-right movement in the country, it's pretty surprising where we've ended up. Connecticut had the foresight to prepare for this moment, passing a new law that has already become a national model for states that believe women are entitled to make their own reproductive and medical decisions. Yet even in the legislative debate, I was dismayed by the statements about abortion rights, particularly as they affect brown and Black people. Access to safe and legal abortions is essential to the larger pursuit of racial equity, and we need to talk about it openly. So I know it may seem like I'm on my soapbox talking about this case, but if we don't talk about it here, and if we don't talk about it in the rooms where we gather, these decisions are going to stand and keep compounding upon themselves. And we're going to end up back in 1955, a place where I know most of us don't want to end up. The reproductive autonomy of Black and brown people is intensely entwined and limited by socioeconomic consequences and racial oppression. In nearly all aspects of reproductive health, women of color face poorer health outcomes than white women, from maternal mortality rate to endometrial and cervical cancer. And it doesn't matter what your social status is. It doesn't matter if you have a JD. It doesn't matter if you're a judge or a law firm partner. These inequalities will, at some point in time, touch you. Additionally, women of color, particularly Black women, frequently have negative experiences in the healthcare system due to a variety of different things, including institutionalized racism. A country that truly values life, family, and security would help its residents by providing a living wage, family planning, and a compassionate foster care system. It would provide young people with adequate reproductive education and not restrict access to birth control. That this decision came at a time when parents quite literally can't find formula to feed their infants illustrates how absurd the moniker has become. These conversations are uncomfortable because healthcare choices are deeply personal, and that's the point. Law shouldn't be written to reflect one person or one group's personal belief, but to fundamentally protect the personal decision-making. In the case of abortion, that decision should be made by a woman and her doctor, not politicians, not the Supreme Court, and not lawyers. It's unacceptable to deny the rights of others just because you might think you need them for yourself. That's the same rationale that has allowed bad faith political actors to excuse inequities throughout government, including the erosion of digital privacy, racially biased drug laws, and denial of basic voting rights. A fierce dedication to individual rights is the only way to make our system fairer and more equitable, and we must strive for that together. If we cede ground on this, it would embolden those who want to govern this country against the majority will of the citizens. The same arguments used to deny abortion access can extend further into the lives of American families. It's not hyperbole to think everything from birth control and in vitro fertilization to same-sex and interracial marriage is now in jeopardy. So we must persevere. There is no room for compromise on essential individual rights. It will only help those who oppose progress take us backwards. As attorneys, many of us feel a genuine desire for balance in the law, to make sure that two sides of a case have an equal opportunity to defend their views and to make their arguments. But there is no balance to be had between right and wrong. There's just right and wrong. I urge you today to make sure that we aren't clinging to our long-held rules to the point where we're the only ones playing by them. Our nation is in the progress of determining what the next half-century will look like, and no one is allowed to sit out this fight. We don't have to agree on everything, but we do need to agree on the big stuff, that every person in this nation deserves liberty and individual rights equal to all others, and that every child in this country deserves an opportunity to grow into a successful and productive adult. As I reflect on my own career and these remarks and the opportunities that led me here, I can't help but think of my daughter and wonder if she'll grow up to find the doors that were open to me are now closed to her. As any parent in the room knows, that's an unacceptable outcome. So we must persevere. Progress is only achievable if we fight for it, and it's worth fighting for. I hope that a decade from now, we're in a room like this, surrounded by many more young and talented people, celebrating perseverance and hard-earned victories together. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, Attorney Braswell, for your comments, and we have a small gift for you before you leave. At this time, we have a videotaped message from our new U.S. Attorney, Vanessa Avery.
Good morning. I am humbled and delighted by this opportunity to participate in today's celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Attorneys of Color Symposium. It is a distinct honor to address you on this important occasion as the United States Attorney for the District of Connecticut. I wish that I could be with you in person to celebrate the many accomplishments of the members of the Connecticut Bench and Bar, and ultimately of our legal community as a whole over the past 10 years. It has been quite remarkable to watch and experience. While we are still very much a work in progress on the diversity, equity, and inclusion front, there is certainly much cause for celebration today. When we held our first symposium in 2012, it was both an opportunity for solemn reflection on our history in this state and an opportunity to reimagine our future. Together, as a bar and in collaboration with the 4 affinity groups for attorneys of color, the Connecticut Asian Pacific American Bar Association, the Connecticut Hispanic Bar Association, the South Asian Bar Association of Connecticut, and the George W. Crawford Black Bar Association. We envisioned a future in which attorneys of color are fully integrated into our law firms, corporate law departments, nonprofit organizations, academia, and government at the federal, state, and local levels. This meant not only seeing diversity at the entry-level ranks, but also in the leadership of institutions in each of those legal sectors. We knew then, as now, that diversity, equity, and inclusion matters not just for appearance's sake, but to enhance our decision-making and the public trust in our system of justice. The more the legal system reflects the people and communities we serve, the better our community engagement and ability to increase public safety across the state. That vision has already begun to take shape. In the past decade, we have witnessed historic numbers of attorneys of color being elevated as judges to both the state and federal courts. There are now several more law firm partners and multiple managing partners who are attorneys of color. Our corporate legal departments are much more diverse and inclusive, and in just a decade, we have had many more law school deans and professors of color. Indeed, the very leadership of the Connecticut Bar Association and Bar Foundation have changed. Through the deliberate efforts of many of you and others who have long been committed to this important work, we have witnessed many historic firsts in leadership and watched our institutions renew and expand their diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments more broadly. And these achievements are not just to be celebrated by attorneys of color. They are achievements for the entire legal community to celebrate. None of this progress would have happened or endured without the strategic efforts and long-standing support of countless mentors, advisors, and allies, including attorneys, judges, and other professionals who are not themselves people of color. These individuals have understood the importance of equal access and equal opportunity, fairness and justice, even within the employment sector of the legal profession itself. They have worked hand in hand with attorneys of color and taken action to ensure that all qualified applicants have a fair chance to compete. This has included notifying and encouraging qualified attorneys to apply for judgeships and other leadership opportunities, advising them during the application process, connecting them with other professional development resources, and challenging them to bring the best version of themselves to the table. I am and will forever be grateful to all those who encouraged and supported me in my own pursuit of such opportunities. In her inaugural poem for the country, The Hill We Climb, Amanda Gorman reminds us that as Americans, if we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it. Because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. And this truth and this faith we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. Even as we continue our collaborative efforts to make greater strides, the importance of celebrating and archiving our history cannot be overstated. Whether we do so with historical timelines, video interviews, in-person events like today's symposium, or through some combination of the three, we must continue to capture the rich history of attorneys of color in Connecticut. I therefore extend special thanks to Connecticut Superior Court Judge Robin Johnson for her pursuit of bringing this important symposium to fruition, along with Judge Barry Armada, Liz Drummond, and the entire Symposium Planning Committee, moderators, and panelists. Best wishes for a successful symposium.
U.S. Attorney Avery could not be with us today. She has obligations in Washington, D.C., and we were so happy that she was willing to send her greetings and message virtually. We wish her the best, and I expect that we will see good things in Connecticut based on her elevation. I want to acknowledge individuals in this room who have paved the way for many of us. So if you have been practicing law for over 40 years, please stand. Without your guidance, your mentoring, you paving the way for us, you opening doors for us, your support today, we would not be here. And because this project is about our future and those doors that have yet to open, if you are a future law student or a current law student, please stand. It may seem at this time that there are no doors that have not been opened, but I guarantee you there are doors still to open. There are ceilings to break through, and we urge you to do so. So at this time, I'm going to indicate during the break, after this next video, that individuals should pay attention to the timeline, which is near the food area, but also there are women judges' portraits in this building The Connecticut Bar Foundation has another historical project that acknowledges the contributions of female attorneys in Connecticut, and female judges' portraits are hanging on the third floor of this building. So during the break, please venture up to the third floor to see the portraits, and we will have a video showing and then an immediate break.
I think documenting stories of attorneys of color is so important because those are histories that fuel the next generation. So, for example, the first Black woman to graduate from the University of Connecticut, that's so important to remember because when you think about how she paved the way for me to attend UConn Law and then go on to become the first Black editor-in-chief of the Connecticut Law Review, our flagship journal, then you remember that now it's incumbent upon you to pave the way for others. So I think as long as we keep these stories alive, there's nothing that we can't do within the Connecticut Bar and beyond.
This project is key for creating the history that someone can look back upon to say, hey, I'm not alone. If I look at a timeline and I see a bunch of white male faces, I'm not represented. If we don't have a timeline, if we don't have attorneys of color in positions of power, and how did they get to be in those positions of power? It was through making the connections. But having connections isn't enough. Knowing that you belong comes from having a history. And if we don't record this history, it will be lost.
Giving young people the opportunity to see that there is a place from which others like them have come and risen to another place. Without it, we're not doing anything for young people. It's important that the world, such as it is, even our little world, see an organization, an entity like this expanding upon the opportunity for young people to see, oops, there was this guy, this old dude who practiced law for 100 years, and there was this really young person, and they're doing it today, and they know one another, they're dealing with one another, they're talking to each other.
I think one of the most important results of this project is honestly a sense of pride. You know, we get to see people who look like us, people from our communities who have done these incredibly important things and have reached these, milestones, and we're proud of that. We get to take that. And it's something that gets you out of bed in the morning. It's something that gets you through tough times like 3 years of law school, knowing that somebody in your community, somebody who looks like you has done this and has excelled at this, and you can too. And that's one of the most important part about telling our stories and keeping them alive.
Support for this project, both financially and also submitting information so that we can have a clearer picture of what the diverse paths are in Connecticut, is key because it's history. We're making history, but if we're not writing it down, how are we going to know? And whoever is writing history is the one that's going to write the narrative. So why don't we write the narrative, because we're writing the history?
Please join us in writing the history. Learn more about supporting the Attorneys of Color Living History Project by visiting the Connecticut Bar Foundation website at ctbarfdn.org. On behalf of all whose footsteps we follow and those whose trails we continue to blaze, thank you.
Good morning. We're going to begin with our first panel. Our first panel focuses on the experience of lawyers, and it's going to be moderated by Namita Shah. Namita is employed as an attorney with Day Pitney. She has been the head of their private equity and finance business unit for some time. She specializes in public and private finance. She's a member of the Institutional Finance and Commercial Lending and Municipal Finance Practice Group. She speaks Hindu, and she's very active with all aspects of public finance, including bond authorizations, disclosures, tax issues, and issuances. She has an extensive experience with state and municipal law, as well as all laws related to state agencies and authorities. So thank you for agreeing to mentor and moderate this particular panel. And at this time, I will turn it over to Attorney Shah.
Thank you. Well, good morning and welcome to the 10th anniversary of the Attorneys of Color Diversity Symposium. And I appreciate that introduction, but also relevant to today. I am a board member of the Connecticut Bar Foundation, a James W. Cooper Fellow, and a former president and board member of the South Asian Bar Association. So I'm super excited that all of those organizations are sponsoring this event. I have the pleasure today of speaking with a few of the state's attorneys of color who are leaders within their organizations. And I'm going to let them give us more in-depth information into their bios, but I'll briefly tell you who they are. We have Andy Correa to my left, who is the managing partner of Murtha Kalina and a widely respected trademark and intellectual property attorney. We've got Christine Jean-Louis, who is an assistant attorney general for the Connecticut Office of the Attorney General in its infrastructure and economic development section, where she currently serves as the president of her office union, the Association of Connecticut Assistant Attorneys General. We have Lucas Hernandez, who owns and operates his own firm, the law offices of Lucas Hernandez, and has an extensive practice in state courts focusing on family law, real estate, probate, and civil litigation. And on Zoom, we've got Keisha Palmer, who is the Hartford office managing partner of Robinson and Cole. And she focuses her practice, like myself, on all aspects of financing activities for entities or projects that can benefit from tax-advantaged obligations. So thanks, Keisha, for accommodating us with your presence on Zoom. So while our focus today is on the impact of the pandemic on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think it's also important to have a general discussion on DEI so that we could see where we currently stand, what efforts have yielded results, either perhaps due to the pandemic or in spite of the pandemic, where we want to be and how we can get there. With or without a pandemic. So there's a lot to cover, and so I'm just going to jump in. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists to briefly tell us about your current position and your path to it. I'll start with Andy.
Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. I became managing partner at Murtha Kalina in 2021. After a selection process that started with an interview of all the partners to determine if anyone had support. During that process, I respectfully told the partnership that I would not do this job twice, having come to the firm a few years earlier announcing that I would not take on administrative responsibilities. Life is what happens when you're making other plans. But I think I was selected for the position and ultimately elected by the partners, despite of or perhaps because of my reluctance to take it on.
Christine?
So I'm currently at the Office of the Attorney General. Actually, today's my last day. So I will be going to the Lieutenant Governor on Friday to be her general counsel. So I'll be working for Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz. But thanks. But overall, my path has been, oh, is this even on? Oh, yeah. My path has been 3 years of clerking from law school, then about 4 years in private practice, and I've been in government now for 8 years. And a lot of it is due to leaders that are in this room, some that are not in this room, but Crawford played a huge role in keeping me in Connecticut. I was really active with it from law school, and meeting other attorneys who look like me played a huge role. So I think if it was not for them, I don't know where I would have been, because I think they did help sustain me and ground me to stay in Connecticut and not leave, because I don't have any family here. So they became my family. So it's a beauty to see that progress, because I started law school in 2005 and here I am now. So it's a little odd being here, but it's great because I definitely stand on the shoulders of a lot of individuals and attorneys of color who came before me. So.
Great. Lucas?
Good morning, everyone. Lucas Hernandez. So a solo practitioner, came out of law school and actually started working as a solo, and have been practicing about 16 years now on my own. Started in Bridgeport and was there for a while, practiced in Stratford, and my office is in Westport. So I have a general practice of family law, real estate, probate are the primary areas of concentration. And I don't know what really helped me develop the practice is being involved with the Bar Association and trying to cultivate a network of mentors. So even if you're a solo, you're never truly a solo. Mm-hmm. You always have to reach out and try to find a mentor or someone who could help guide you, give you advice, work with you as a sounding board. And that's been my experience to this point.
Terrific. Thank you. Keisha?
Thank you, Namita. Morning, everyone. Apologies for not being there in person, but I'm happy to be able to join you virtually at least. My name is Keisha Palmer. I'm a partner at Robinson & Cole in the Public Finance Department, which means I have the pleasure of working with Namita almost every day. And many of the panelists are folks I spend a lot of time with. So hello again, everyone. I have been at Robinson & Cole since I graduated law school. I was a summer associate there, was also a summer associate at Andy's firm when I was a 1L summer. My second year summer at Robinson & Cole, opted to join Robinson & Cole, and I have I've been there ever since. I would say, it's been a great experience, and I'm pretty sure I'm starting to talk about Namita's first question, so I'm going to stop and let her actually ask the question.
Okay, Keisha, so what unique challenges have you faced as a diverse leader in the legal profession?
I don't think everyone necessarily has the same experience. For me, there really isn't anything. There aren't really any obstacles that I can point to. I think in the end, I went to the place where I belong. In that I found an environment that was very supportive and people who both supported my goals and pushed me when they thought that I may not be going far enough. And I think that those are the things that you sort of need. I think first you have to sort of want to be a leader, but then you need the extra push. The things that I would say are challenges, especially during the pandemic. So I became the partner in charge of the Hartford office about 3 days before we went into complete shutdown. Congratulations to me. So we have our firm culture is that we spend a lot of time together, and we have lots of social activities that are designed to grow and maintain our culture. And so we had to immediately pivot to figuring out how we were going to do that virtually. Of course, we thought we were only going to do it for 2 or 3 weeks, so it was no biggie. But then it dawned upon us that this was not 2 or 3 weeks and we might be in for the long haul. So figuring out how to remain connected in the same way virtually was a big challenge for me. I think that I tend to connect with people really well in person. I've never had to do it virtually, so it was a learning experience to see whether people sort of get me in the same way when we're on a virtual platform versus in person, where they can have a real kind of sense of my tone and just my personal presence. So I found that to be a challenge, and I don't think that was necessarily tied to diversity. I think that was just challenging in and of itself. To be a diverse leader, I don't think that, I think there's the usual things that come along with being diverse, right? You are always going to deal with implicit biases. I've had the good fortune of not having to deal with any explicit biases, but implicit bias is still pretty challenging. And the way that I think I have dealt with it is, one, I always assume that when I walk into a room, that I'm wanted in the room. So I start from that basis. Unless someone indicates otherwise, I go with that. And I found that has worked for me to help me in some ways overcome what is a challenge that we as the diverse lawyers may be in front of, but I think it's a challenge really for everyone, because I think everyone is fighting those implicit biases that they don't even know that they hold.
You raise an interesting point to me right now, because I feel like a lot of it is kind of what's going on in your own head. I remember you're coming from a place, you just said, where you go in thinking you're wanted there and you belong there and the like, right? My very first, I became a partner, and at our firm they have these Friday partner lunches, and the very first partner lunch I went to, I like flowers. I wear very flowery dresses a lot of times and whatnot, long, flowy dresses. I walk into this partner lunch, and it's on a Friday every time. And I swear to God, every single person there was a white male wearing some form of blue shirt. It was checkers, it was plain, dress down Fridays, khaki pants, right? Every single one of them sitting around the table, and I walk in, and the first thought I had was, I so don't belong here. And it had nothing to do with their reception of me, right? Like it was a lot of it was just in my head. And I'm like, all right, I will power through this. And I sat down, and then slowly some women come in, and and it was fine. It was fine. But like that very first thing, you walk in and you see 15 white men around a table, and if someone was wearing a pink shirt, I think that would have made me feel a little bit better. But I swear it was blue shirts all around. So I do like the point you made about you walking in with that attitude. I think that's super useful. Lucas, as a solo, what challenges have you faced?
I was just thinking about what you both had said, and two things came to mind. That if you're starting out, just that maybe belief in yourself that you need to have. I don't know, almost the idea like when you get to the finish line, pretend like you've been there before, right? I don't know who said that. I'm borrowing quotes. And then the Henry Ford quote, like, if you think you could do it, you're right. And if you think you can't do it, you're still right. So working by yourself, you're your own worst critic, you're your own boss. I think one of the challenges for having a practice on your own, you can't be a shy person. That's probably the enemy to you being able to accomplish anything, because whether you're a great lawyer or you're not a great lawyer, nobody is going to come and look for you. You have to make efforts to reach out and to go out, to find opportunities, to make opportunities. So just, dealing with doing your work, taking on cases for the first time. Everybody has a starting point.
Yep.
And I think if you're in a group with other people, maybe it's easier to bounce ideas off of others. But at the same time, I haven't had a large firm experience. So I'm on a panel as the solo guy with everyone who's working at a larger place. But I would think that you have a pressure also working in a group that you have to ask questions, but maybe you don't want to ask too many questions because you always have to, project a competency or a confidence. So, we all have responsibilities in our professional lives, in our practices, to your clients, to appear confident, to your peers, to appear competent. Managing that, understanding how to do that, little by little, having the confidence to grow into that. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's just some of my thoughts on the topic.
Awesome. Christine?
So I'm going to answer the question from the perspective of someone who, for the past 7 years, I did some type of training on diversity. So when I was with the CBA, I had led the Diversity Inclusion Summit, and I did that for a few years. I was part of the signatories. When I joined the AG's office, I chaired the Diversity Inclusion Committee there. I've done training for new employee hires for the state, for both the AG's office, Lieutenant Governor's office, and for Division of Criminal Justice for the prosecutors. So coming from all those perspectives and being in law firms and working with them on their diversity groups, I think the unique challenge for diverse leaders is getting the buy-in that is consistent and sustaining, because intentions matter. So I think COVID has made it trendy to work on DEI initiatives. And at the end of the day, if you don't have the right reasons and intentions behind it, it doesn't really matter. I don't think it's going to be as sustaining as it should be or make the impacts that people may want. So we heard earlier Comptroller Braswell kind of discuss our highest court overturning decades of precedent and the importance of having those conversations in spaces like this. So I would say if you're truly supporting DEI, then are you talking about hot topics at work that impact your employees day to day? And if not, then are your intentions behind DEI truly aligned? Because if we're afraid to bring up conversations or issues and topics because of fear of having the conversation, then we truly have not progressed in DEI the way I think we should. I also look around this room, and as beautiful as it is, I start asking, where are the non-diverse people in this room, and why aren't they here? And I don't know what it looks like virtually, but until we're having these types of conversations with people who don't always look like us, and they're here, and these issues are as important to them, then I think we still have that unique challenge. We have to ask, well, I know a question that's common is who gets to lead the charge when it comes to DEI? Should it be all the people that are diverse? Should it be the people that are not diverse? But I think until those issues are important to everyone, not just those that look a certain way, and they're led by those who are not diverse, and they're incorporated into an organization's DNA, which I don't think has truly happened for a lot of organizations, then we still have those challenges to overcome. And those are still unique to DEI work. So that's where I think are the unique challenges for us.
I think that for me, and I think this is true for a lot of leaders of law firms who come from diverse backgrounds, it's imposter syndrome times a million. When you don't see people who look like you in the same positions that you're now stepping into, you don't have a built-in, or to borrow a phrase from Christine, it's not in your DNA. And in the legal profession, leadership has not been in the DNA of people from diverse backgrounds. In fact, it's been selectively excluded from the DNA for many people. And I recall the first partners meeting that I chaired. To put it into perspective, this is the meeting where the firm's partners approve the budget and compensation slate. No one can get paid until they approve this. So it always gets approved, right? Like, no one's voting down the thing that like, you approve this or you don't get paid Friday. The amount of time I spent preparing for that meeting was absolutely ludicrous. I had 7 to 10 pages of notes explaining every single line in the budget, everything that was done, even though it had already been sent out to everybody, even though there were already memos on everything, even though there was not a single point of controversy. I was absolutely terrified being in front of this group, knowing that last year when I was in the room for that group, no one really paid much attention to it. But the fear of failing on that first totally routine vote was just overwhelming. And I think a lot of that, looking back, had to do with the fact, I mean, it's natural to some degree. It's the first partners meeting I chaired. But a lot of it had to do with just the sense that I don't belong in this role. And that's a hard thing to overcome because I think Lucas put it really well. You have to project a sense of command. That's part of the job. But without seeing people who look like you in that role, it's really hard to feel that confidence.
So, Christine, as a trainer on DEI, what does DEI mean to your organization?
So I know for the AG's office, it's a living and breathing daily type of situation. It means making it part of our DNA. And that was with both AGs. So I worked under Attorney General Jepsen, and now I'm under Attorney General William Tong. And for both of them, they've had the same mindset, which was great, because it was important. So it means from our top and middle leadership, it has to be reflective of the diversity from the bottom, which we've been seeing. Our leaders in the administration are diverse. We are majority women. The top leadership is pretty much majority women. It means accessibility to opportunities and recognition of the roles that everyone play. Working for the state of Connecticut as an employer, it's not uncommon to have slow advancement or opportunities. It doesn't exist. And then people stay for long periods of time, so it makes it hard for people to be promoted up. So we try to be really creative. It forces us to be creative in providing professional development in a certain way and to grow and maintain and sustain in a certain way. And when the attorneys in my office unionized, it meant that we were able to sustain our work culture as much as possible, regardless of who's leading. And that helped a lot. We are Connecticut's largest employee when it comes to attorneys. There's like 200 attorneys that are there. And like I said, those attorneys can be with us for 40 years. And the benefit of being at the AG's office is you could be there for 40 years and be in 5 different units and never leave the AG's office. You could practice law in an array of different areas so you don't get bored, which is nice. And that helps us with retention. So diversity also means allowing our attorneys the ability to grow in practice areas and letting them have that flexibility of moving around where they want.
Great. So Lucas, you are it at your firm, but in what aspects of your legal work does DEI have an impact, and what does that mean?
That's a tough question for a solo to answer because you are a solo. But I think, constantly performing to a high level, I think we all feel that obligation. And then more so, because you know you just have to. You know,
Like, do you have challenges with clients? Either, like, is it helpful or hurtful?
it hasn't been, in my experience, it hasn't been anything overt
Okay.
that I've seen from clients. But then I'm also in the position too, because it's my own place.
Yep.
If you had a client that you didn't agree with, that doesn't have to be a client. You know, you have the choice to do that if you're the boss. But also, if you want to work, then you have to understand you're not going to get along with everyone. And then also sometimes working with people, you develop relationships. And, you know, sometimes people's attitudes change. They might have one impression when they initially meet you, and then after they've worked with you, they get to have a different impression. So just constantly performing to a high level, you know, being responsible, you know, doing what you should be doing.
Good. Keisha, what does DEI mean to Robinson and Cole?
So it lines up pretty much with a lot of the comments that that Christine made earlier. I agree completely that if DEI is not a part of the DNA of the organization, then it's going to be pretty hard for you to accomplish your goals. Christine asked the question earlier, who's leading the effort? Is it the diverse people or the non-diverse people? And my answer to that is it's neither. It's the person with the most influence, because you want that person speaking to the non-believers, because you're already preaching to the choir when you're talking to the people who believe in DEI. They don't need any more convincing. The people that you need to bring along are the people who either think it's not an issue, which is a problem, but it's a solvable problem or an easier problem to solve. And you're definitely speaking to the people who think, well, it is an issue, but it's not my problem, because it's everybody's problem. If you're part of an organization and you have goals related to DEI, it has to be everyone's goals. It can't be only for a certain constituency. And so for Robinson and Cole, our leadership on DEI starts at the top. Our managing partner serves on our DEI committee, and most of the partners who serve on the committee are the partners with a lot of influence in the firm. And influence can mean different things, right? So sometimes it's the person with a really large book of business, because other people who aspire to have that role, who aspire to have that type of business, or who are just looking for somebody who's on par with them, are going to listen to that person. In other aspects, it's the person who everyone likes, because they'll do what you ask because they like you, and they want you to be happy. And then, of course, it's the people who hold the actual power. So the managing committee. When the managing committee says this is what we're doing, we're lawyers and it's a law firm, so of course you can disagree. You're not supposed to, but you can. But we have a pretty good bunch. So, you know, people tend to do what is asked of them. And sometimes people are doing what's asked of them, even though they may not be a true believer. But as Lucas said, sometimes you need experience, right? Sometimes they need to experience what is being asked of them to start to believe in the concept of what we're doing and what the possible outcomes are.
Thank you. So Andy, does your organization need to do more, or do you feel like you're at a good place?
So spoiler alert, more, right? I think that for Martha, DEI is very much a work in progress. And echoing what Keisha just said, it does not work unless you get the buy-in from those partners, particularly those who are the most influential in the firm, influential for a variety of reasons. And I think for us, it really starts with educating ourselves and educating the partners on the challenges that face attorneys from diverse backgrounds. At a previous firm, I introduced the concept of implicit bias, and one of the partners said, well, I'm not aware of any implicit bias issues we have. Yeah, that's implicit. Implicit's doing a lot of work in this phrase. But, we do a lot of training on this at Murtha on implicit bias. It's one of our principal areas that we try to train partners on because of the literature is so clear as to the profound effects it has. We're also challenged in this environment in finding ways to build our team, to build our culture. It's hard enough to maintain a culture in this semi-post-pandemic world. It's really hard to change it, right? You're asking people to buy in, to change the way they evaluate people, to change the way we recruit and retain, and doing that where you can't always be in a room together is even more complex than it would have been otherwise. So that continues to be an ongoing challenge. But we're also mindful of I don't know whether it's a rapidly changing world or a world in which we recognize some things that maybe we didn't recognize before, that as a law firm we have obligations to our community that and for what is primarily a corporate and transactional firm, finding ways to contribute in our community can be difficult. So we have tried to engage diversity not only internally but externally with the kind of clients we serve. We've encouraged our people to find pro bono activities that are tied to DE&I. We've started initiatives with universities that serve historically diverse student bodies to help provide services to their entrepreneurs to try to increase our client service in this area. People who might not otherwise hire Murtha can now get services that to try to have our lawyers work with diverse communities, even where our lawyers themselves might not be diverse.
So, do you have any tangible goals that you want to meet?
I hesitate to put numbers on things because there are so many challenges to meeting those. One of the best things we did in trying to formulate better DE&I policies was and something I am very proud of is that we added a DE&I billable hour credit for associates and counsel, and that when I was chair of the business and finance department, I realized that notwithstanding the policy, those hours weren't showing up in the spreadsheet that was used to evaluate people at the end of the year, and I insisted that we redo the whole spreadsheet, and it turned out that 2 attorneys got bonuses that year who would not otherwise have gotten it because it was their DE&I hours that put them over the line. I think that's sort of exemplary of something we've kind of touched on here, of having people with a stake in this, and having people who really care about this issue to spot those things, to push firms into meeting their obligations. I think honestly, I think a lot of the firms, I think mine and Namita's, they do have good intentions as organizations, but until you have people who really care about the issue making decisions, being in those smaller rooms where decisions get made, things don't actually happen. So that was a really big thing that was tangible. It then percolated through the firm, and one of the things I want to see more of is I want to see more of our attorneys filling in that column. I want to see more hours in that column, and I want to see those hours coming from everybody in the firm, not just the attorneys with diverse backgrounds. If we get to where those hours and the pro bono hours start to look similar, I'll feel like we've made real progress.
Good. Christine, do you guys have any tangible goals that you're working towards?
So I think what's interesting is we take a perspective of trying to be as inclusive as possible as an organization. So we don't have any tangible goals that are specific to D&I. Our goal is to kind of make sure everyone that's in the organization knows that we are diverse, we are working in diverse environments, and you're equipped to handle those. Because especially with the attorneys and staff dealing a lot with the general public, who does not always look like the individuals that are handling them. But what we have in the office is, which I think makes a big difference, is this work culture committee. And the work culture committee focuses on exactly that, work culture. And they're a mixed group from staff to attorneys to leaders in administration. And they do a lot of different activities to kind of get people to meet. What was interesting was when the pandemic happened, we were doing great in person because a lot of our relationships being so close together are in person and seeing people and touching people. But the pandemic happened, and it kind of shifted us because we didn't get that ability to have those connections anymore. So no matter what anyone says, virtual is great, but it's not the same as seeing people and interacting with people. And that was our bread and butter. But it was great in the sense that it also allowed us a broader opportunity to do things remotely, and we got access to more people that we normally wouldn't have because we are across the whole entire state, and we have individuals who are in different branches that couldn't always make it to Hartford. So it was great and it was bad, but we've worked on it. So when it comes to DEI initiatives, I think we just focus on being as inclusive as possible to make sure we include everyone, and that by nature ends up kind of indirectly addressing diversity issues. I would love for everyone to be trained. Unfortunately, the state has this weird glitch that if you've been in state government for a long time, you don't need to be trained. But all new employees, all the new employees have to be trained. So the new employees, I think, embody what we want with DEI. But I would love to eventually have the statute changed to at least allow all state employees to have training on this every 3 years. Because your training from 20 years ago is not the same as the environment we're in now. So I think that's one initiative I think we need to work on the state level.
So like, do they also get grandfathered out of, like, I know like we have to do, like, sexual harassment training and stuff. Do they also get grandfathered out of
those?
that?
They still require all of us to do. Because, the sexual harassment stuff, gun training, like all of that we have to still do. But the D&I is the one thing that they get grandfathered out of, which I don't like.
I hear you. So, Lucas, have you how have you dealt with implicit bias as in your practice? And I guess with you, maybe it's within the courts, it's within clients, it's within your peers. Have you felt any implicit biases, and if so, like how have you dealt with that?
What can you share with the group, and then what kind of occurs to you naturally? I don't know. Just in the course of things. So my name is Lucas Hernandez, and I remember dealing with a lender, and it's like, oh, is this attorney Luis Gonzalez? And it's like, you guys aren't even trying. Wait, what are you? Do people have a certain perception just because they see your name, and then they assume that something will come after, as opposed to if you see someone face to face, and there's a different way that people will deal with you, based on how you come across, based on how you dress, based on how you present, based on your academic credentials. I know that there's bias. It would be you wouldn't be accepting reality if you thought that there wasn't, even in a solo practice. But I mean, I'm not feeling it from a boss. I don't know that I would be feeling it from clients that will stay with you. These are hard questions, because to answer in a panel where people work with organizations, and then the experience, of working on your own or by yourself. You know, certainly amongst my colleagues, I don't feel that as much because I'm selective on, you know, who you choose to have as friends and, you know, who you associate with. But, you know, professionally dealing with other lawyers or firms, I can't point to specific overt examples that I'm dealing with. So you'll eventually ask me a question that I feel like I'm going to hit out of the park.
And
but
jump right in
these are
when you
tough.
hear it.
I will jump in, I promise.
Keisha, do you guys do anything with implicit bias? Do you have trainings or anything of the like?
We do. Unlike our state government, where certain rules prohibit the implementation of things, or at least makes it take a while to get done. In a private organization, one of the good things is that you can just tell people, like, you're doing this, and it's mandatory, and so we do it. We have implicit bias training for everyone in the firm, so firm-wide, including our staff. And now I've forgotten the period, but I believe we do that every year. And then we have implicit bias training set out by, and it rotates through groups. So it's every year, but everybody's not doing it at the same time. So we have like a firm-wide presentation that's for everyone, and that's annual. And then we have group training. So we have the folks who are our managing committee has implicit bias training. Our partners have their separate sessions of implicit bias training, and typically they run 1 to 3 sessions. And then we have the same training for our counsel and for our non-partner, non-counsel group of attorneys, or associates, and staff attorneys, etc. And then for our staff as well. Other than outside of kind of the formalized training that we do and have people come in, we try to have lots of learning opportunities. So our DEI committee is very active, and we put on a lot of programming about various aspects of things, but we also spend a lot of time. I think we have a couple of presentations every year on different aspects of implicit bias, sort of looking at it from different perspectives, because it's really hard sometimes to tell somebody, like, you're biased. Nobody wants to hear that. And our natural response is to be defensive and say, I don't have a biased bone in my body, which probably means you don't have any bones, but so we try to, I always say that when you approach DEI, you need to have sort of 2 tools in your tool belt. You need the hammer and you need a feather. And sometimes you have to bring the hammer because it needs to be done. But every now and again, you want to use a feather, because kind of forcing something down people's throat all the time doesn't make it very palatable. So you want to do it sometimes in a way that makes people say, I can see that. I don't think it's me, but I can see that. And often what we find is after a couple of these sessions, we'll find people, I think the other thing you have to do is create an open environment where people feel free to speak, at least speak to at least somebody. We often find, I often find, I hear from people afterwards saying, I didn't think that was me, but the more I think back on the arc of my life, I've seen where I've done some of those things without thinking about it. And this is the important part. I'm going to do something about it going forward, because just recognizing that you've done it and carrying on your merry way is not helpful.
Yep. I would encourage folks, I took that Harvard implicit bias test. If you do a little Google search and you find it, I mean, it was fascinating. I thought the results, and, I'm like, I was sort of embarrassed, but, I'll admit it, I was sort of embarrassed by some of the results because, I sit here, I think I'm so open and free, but like all of this stuff kind of just comes out, and it was scary, and it made me more aware, you know, and on so many different things, right? The hard for folks who don't know about it, you know, there's like ageism, you know, male versus female, color, this, you know, religion, disability. It's a whole spectrum of different tests you can take, and I think doing that self-assessment was very useful.
Yeah, and just to go off script for a second, it's because we think we have more control over ourselves and forget that our brain has more control, and our brain is taking in more information than we realize, and it dictates our perceptions and what we do. So taking that test is what helps us recognize what the bias is, and as Keisha said, then once you know and identify them, what do you do from there?
Right, and you know, and the trainings I think are very useful, but then also kind of putting things into practice and calling people out on things in a professional way. You know, I always go back to, you know, we're all professionals, but you know, and I'm going to tell a very embarrassing story about somebody at my firm, because I love my firm. I think there's great people there, and I think the person who made this comment is a very good person too. But you know, we had a partner who asked another partner, like, "Hey, do diverse associates have different working hours? Like, you know, like what? Do they not have to bill as much? You know, or something?" You know, he was working with a diverse associate, and she pushed back, or, you know, couldn't get something done, or didn't get it to him when it was on time, right? But immediately he goes to, you know, do they have different standards? And the person who he said this to is, you know, a white woman who said, "That is an incredibly stupid statement you just said." And like, she literally called him out on it. And that was impactful, right? I mean, I think that was impactful on him for, you know, yeah, like, it was stupid. I shouldn't have said that, and I shouldn't even be thinking, you know, and it got to the point, well, you're right, I shouldn't be thinking this, because, you know, we have a lot of associates with issues. You know, we have great associates, we have associates with issues, right? And it's not, you hear that, and I mean, to his credit, he said it out loud, right? Versus just thinking it and internalizing it. You know, I hate saying to his credit, right? But, you know, internalizing it, but he said it, and she immediately called him out on it, right? And I think, you know, and I've been in certain situations where, you know, you see these implicit biases come out, and I've walked out of places and my head was about to explode, but then you calm down, and, you know, like, I've sent some long kind of, you know, more informational emails to, you know, the person, you know, who, I don't want to say violator, but, you know, the person who did whatever made my head explode, you know, but I try to take a step back, and I try to, like, be thoughtful and kind of just provide an explanation. And I think those are like the little things each of us can do in our lives, you know, when we see it, when we feel it. But, you know, those were just some of my thoughts on that.
If I may interject, Namita, one of my favorite questions when people say things that makes your head turn is to ask them, what makes you say that? And sometimes some people are really brave. They'll give you the explanation. And it does create a teaching moment.
Right.
Because especially if you start with the assumption that we're all teachable, right?
Yep.
And some people, just by me simply asking them that, re-examine your statement. They don't give you the answer, but you hear them start to walk it back. Mm-hmm. Oh, now I hear how that came across. Let me explain what I really meant. Sometimes the explanation isn't much better. But sometimes they may have said it in a way that made you sort of open your eyes a little wider. But when you get to the heart of what you were trying to communicate, there was really no malintention underlying it. But again, it's another opportunity to say, well, you might not want to say it quite that way next time.
Yep.
So I wanted to throw out a credit to the Connecticut judiciary. They prepared, I thought, a really impactful video for jurors on implicit bias, which we circulated internally to everyone in the firm. I thought it was one of the best short summaries and explanations of that topic in a way that was very understandable and relatable without being without necessarily putting people on the defensive. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth looking for and circulating within your organizations.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Just maybe to touch upon the judiciary with what Andy was saying, one of the things that I was thinking about, like what's impacted my views as a solo or different experiences, that what effect has COVID had? A very, very serious effect in terms of just access with the courts and kind of us not going to court on a regular basis the way we were. The sense of community that's, especially if you're a solo practitioner or if you're in a small firm, 2-3 people or a small group, you have to have that exposure to your peers. And not just going to court and having the experience of being before the judge, but going to court and seeing your fellow lawyers and saying hello, and that sense of community that we have as professionals with one another that these past 2 years we haven't been able to. And even just going back on some of the family cases that I've had, you're in court, you're in front of the judge, but it seems like they want people to wait in the hall, just because of COVID protocol or safety for, everyone involved. You understand that. But part of what being a young lawyer was to me was being able to go to court and sit in and watch other people practice. And how do they say things and how do they approach emotion? And just that experience of being in court and learning while you're there, you can't do that online. And it's hard to do that from the hall if you're sitting out. So I just, as things start to go back to normal, I'm just hoping that, we get that experience of being able to see one another again, of being able to go to court more regularly and sit in and watch things. Because for many people, that's a very important part of practice. I know that it was for me. And that's not something that you advertise, but that's just something that you did quietly so that you can learn. And that's something that's not available right now. And it's important, I think, for community, for growth, for understanding. It's very important.
Yeah, and I think several people mentioned, how important mentors were to them, right? And having, the affinity groups, right? I mean, that's where we get a lot of our mentors from. And I think the pandemic was a challenge to those, existing relationships and for the new attorneys making those relationships, right? And I do feel it's a little bit incumbent on kind of some of us older people to, try to continue that and make an extra effort, because that's that's how we continue the process.
And I think it's important too to never forget. Like, a lot of people helped me as I was moving along and helped me to this day. And I mean, everyone sitting in the room, as time goes by, like, you'll be someone's mentor. If the phone rings, you have obligation to pick it up and call somebody back or write an email. I don't know that you could ever say that you're too busy. You can't be. You have to make time for certain things.
Yep. Christine, so we're running. We're really running out of time. So I'm going to skip a whole bunch of questions and just say, as this is the 10th year of this symposium, where do you think we are on DEI compared to 10 years ago, and where do you want to see us in another 10 years?
So I think the pandemic has kind of shifted DEI in a positive way, but it also kind of highlighted some weak points. So 10 years ago, I remember you had to make a business case for DEI. You had to justify it somehow. But now it's done because either society is demanding it, you have clients demanding it, it's just part of our culture now overall. And in many instances, it's just the right thing to do. So it's just something we're trying to be more intentional about. But even still, as I was saying earlier, the why behind that intention still matters. So I hope that 10 years into the future, we will be in a place where this work is just routine. This is just part of our business policies. It's part of our infrastructure. It's just everyday, weekly. It's just like, it's as unconscious as we breathe. It's just what we do. And for many of us 10 years ago, I remember when I was a law student, and this was in 2005, many of the attorneys we see now who are first were just like kind of on that path starting history. I remember you could count on one hand all the women of color partners that were there, because I remember we had to do a panel, and I was like, all the women of color partners in the state of Connecticut was in the room on that panel. And now we have dozens and dozens, and you have to count them all, and it's amazing to see just that progress, and knowing that we haven't even peaked yet. We're still like kind of moving up in that direction. So even though I'm excited to see what happens in 10 years, I'm even more excited to see what's happening in the next year or two, because we're starting to kind of see a lot of that peaking about to come, and it's just excited to just kind of see that growth and see what's going to happen.
Andy, same question.
So I think it's really striking how the leadership of Connecticut law firms has changed in the past, especially the past 2 to 3 years. Looking at the, at the panels that were in the hallway, and you think back when Judge Thompson was first named as managing partner of Robinson, and what a cataclysmic change that was. What an extraordinary thing that was at the time. And now the leadership of so many of our firms reflects a much more diverse background. So there's progress there, and that's something to be proud of. What I would really like to see over the next 10 years is a recognition among law firms, corporate law departments, clients, judiciary, everyone, that there are a lot of different paths and a lot of different looks for what a really good lawyer can be, right? Historically, we think of lawyers as looking a certain way and acting a certain way and dressing a certain way and being a certain way. And that concept, I would love to see that concept be relegated to the archives of history, and to recognize that great lawyers come in a whole lot of different looks, a whole lot of different packages, and to put away forever the idea that they look, sound, and act a certain way.
So I think the pandemic was helpful on the dressing a certain way. So with that, we are out of time. So I would like to thank each of our panelists, and I would like to thank the audience for listening to us. Thank you all.
All right. Our closing remarks today are going to be presented by Attorney John Rose. For those of you who do not know John Rose, he began practicing in 1966. He was the first African-American partner of any major law firm in Connecticut in 1984. He was the first attorney of color to sit on the Judicial Selection Commission. He paved the way for me and many, many, many other judges who went through that process. And when you talk about being in the room where it happened, well, before John Rose, there was no one else. John Rose has been instrumental in setting policy as corporation counsel in Hartford, Connecticut, as well as New Haven. He has mentored, at this point, I think it's hundreds, if not thousands of attorneys of all races and creed and background in the state of Connecticut. And he continues to be active with the George Crawford Black Bar Association, which he and other members founded, that paved the way for the additional affinity bar associations. He's also a member of the Connecticut Bar Association and the National Bar Association and the International Municipal Lawyers Association. His contributions to the performing arts is unparalleled. I am so jealous of his ability to sit on the boards of the Hartford Stage, Long Wharf Theater, and to have one of our most premier actresses in his family in the performing arts community. I know you will be happy to get to meet and know and hear from Attorney John Rose.
Thank you, Robin. My daughter is Anika Noni Rose. For those who don't, I can sit down and you can celebrate her, and it's all good. I was one of 12 children born on Cape Cod many years ago. I went to Dartmouth College, 850 young men, 2 blacks. Class after mine, 1. Yale Law School, I got into. I loved the prospect of being a lawyer. It became interesting, but I'm going to tell you a little story. About, I think I was 3 years into my having become a partner at a firm called Ribicoff and Kotkin. And there was a meeting of, I think, 17 or 19 senior partners who ran the state's largest law firms. And believe it or not, the meeting was held at the Institute for the Living in Hartford. And if you know a little bit about Connecticut, it's an insane asylum. But that's how appropriate the audience place was. 19 or 17, and I can't remember which it was now, white men sat around and decided policy for their firms throughout the state of Connecticut. Interesting stuff. One day they sat up and said, what are we going to do about the minority lawyer situation? And they looked around and there were 19 of them looking at themselves, trying to decide whatever. But there were actually 3 black partners back then, Joe Moniz, Sandy Cloud, and me. So they invited us to come in and talk to them about what could be done with minority lawyer production, of getting more black lawyers and Hispanic lawyers and people from other countries to come and be lawyers in Connecticut. We founded George Crawford way back when. I named it because I was in New Haven, having graduated there from law school, and George Crawford practiced law in New Haven. He was Booker T. Washington's houseboy. He grew up in Alabama. He got into law school, 2 law schools, Harvard and Yale, took a steamboat to New Haven, and practiced law in New Haven till he was 98 years old. He rewrote the Connecticut probate code. He was the first black, maybe not nationally, but maybe nationally, first black corporation counsel in a city in this country. I decided, without having done any research at all, that he graduated Yale in 1906. He must be the first black Yale Law School graduate who took the Connecticut bar. He was not, but the name is stuck because George Crawford deserves the honor. We deserve to be able to honor him, and so I'm thrilled that George Crawford Black Association continues to be. I'm wearing a pin. You can't see it from, probably not from where you're sitting, but right there is that teeny little 50-year pin. My daughter pinned it on me, I think, almost 5 years ago. Connecticut Bar Association has done a lot of good and is going to continue to do a lot of good. This program that all of us are here celebrating today is one of the really great and wonderful things that the Bar Association can do for its membership. I'm thrilled to have been a member for God knows how many years, and I'm thrilled to participate in this program, and it's making all of us better. One last thing, and unfortunately, an awful lot of the younger women who were here have left. I was corporation counsel in Hartford for 6 years. I was corporation counsel in New Haven for 5 years. When I was at Hartford, I had a lot of problems with lawyers because the charter said there shall be 15 lawyers in the corporation counsel's office. I got down to as few as 5, never got above 9. They changed the charter to say it may be 15. So I was looking for clerks. And I found at UConn Law School young women, one of whom spoke today as the main speaker, who's gone on to fairly substantial efforts in her own right. There were almost no young black men at UConn back then, but there were a significant number, relatively speaking, of young women. And my experience was I had the best law clerks that I could have because they were young women. If you look around law schools today, so many of the young people who are here, not young men. I mean, what year are you? And is there another young black man all the way up in the top? That's 2. If you looked around this room earlier, there were a substantial number of young black women who are getting to be the backbone of the black bar. Good for you. Keep it up. I don't know what I can do for you, but I'm around. And I want to say thank you to the judges, the people who've appeared here today. I think it's a wonderful experience for all of us to see the growth that the minority bars have brought to this community. Robin, thank you very much. My pleasure. Be well. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for attending. I appreciate the committee's work. Everyone on the committee received a small token of our appreciation. I want to remind you to do the surveys that are so important to the work of the Connecticut Bar Foundation. And if you contributed some suggestions as to what's off the timeline, we still will continue to receive information. We have a drop-down box on the Connecticut Bar Foundation website, so you can communicate with us through that website. And most certainly, we will continue to work on this emerging project. We hope to go forward with the next phase in the fall. The committee asked for the summer off. I don't know why. But that will be granted, so ordered, as we say. And thank you very much for spending your time with us and contributing to this wonderful event. Have a good summer.